Hi guys. Tonight we begin a slow, meandering journey into a world often romanticized in scroll and cinema but rarely understood in its aching reality. This is not the glittering court of the dragon throne or a tale of emperors and poets etched in gold. Instead, we'll wander into the quiet, clattering alleys of Imperial China, not to conquer it, but to live it. Imagine yourself not as a noble, but as one of the forgotten millions who toiled, suffered, whispered, and wept beneath the vast sky of dynasties. Each part of this story is a window into a single day in that life. And by the end, perhaps you'll understand why most of us, modern and soft-hearted, would not last a day in Imperial China. It begins, quietly, as the morning mist rolls off the banks of the Yangtze. Before the sun kissed the jade-tipped roofs of Anyang, the village already stirred. Beneath a pale peach sky, shaped by the first soft hums of morning, a low-ranking farmer named Liu Cheng opened his eyes to the scent of cold earth. He lay not in a bed, but on a mat of rice straw, his back aching from the chilled night. His home, a single-room structure of cracked mudbrick and smoke-stained rafters, held nothing but necessity. A chipped ceramic jug, a low wooden table with one missing leg, a pile of folded hemp garments, stiff and damp from the humidity of summer rains. He did not rise at once. For a moment, he simply listened, eyes open, breath held, the distant bark of a stray dog, the rustle of bamboo leaves outside the cloth-covered window, the muffled coughs of neighbours through thin walls. These were the sounds that signalled he had survived the night again. A sliver of fear always came in those first moments. In Imperial China, the morning did not promise safety. It merely offered another chance to endure. Liu Cheng's wife, Meilin, had already risen. Her bare feet whispered against the earthen floor as she stoked the fire pit with last night's brittle twigs. Smoke crept upward, curling around the room like a spirit, leaving a residue that would darken the beams a shade deeper by year's end. The water in the iron kettle had not yet boiled, but Meilin did not wait. She dipped her fingers in, wincing slightly, then began soaking the leftover millet for their only meal until sundown. The air inside was thick with smoke and the smell of mildew. Outside, however, the world was awakening into colour. The path that wound between the homes was already marked with footprints. Children squatted beside puddles, poking them with sticks. A widow in a grey robe swept leaves into a pile as if it might make the pain of her loneliness vanish. Further along, the tax collector's assistant was heard shouting, his voice hoarse, furious, because 3 families had failed to provide their rice share on time. Liu Cheng rose without a word, tied a frayed rope around his faded tunic, and stepped into the mist. The earth was soft beneath his sandals, fragrant with wormwood and decay. Before heading to the fields, he paused by the small shrine outside their doorway. The wooden effigy of Tudi Gong, the earth god, was cracked from sun and age, but Liu bowed deeply. 3 times. He did not offer incense. That luxury was months away, once the barley sold. But he whispered a plea, low and urgent, asking for dry skies and mercy from bureaucrats. There were no answers. In the fields, the work was endless and brutal. The soil was stubborn, tangled with weeds that had to be torn by hand. No oxen, no plough. Only Liu, his calloused palms, and a bamboo hoe worn smooth by generations of use. By mid-morning, his tunic was dark with sweat. The sun, now fully risen, was merciless. Meilin arrived then, balancing a clay jar of water wrapped in linen to keep it cool. She didn't speak, just handed it to him with a nod, then joined him in the rows of sprouting sorghum. This was their routine. No dreams, no complaints, only motion, a rhythm as old as the mountains that watched them from a distance. Yet beneath the surface of this simplicity, danger simmered. A rumour had spread the week before, one that fluttered from mouth to mouth like a leaf caught in wind. Bandits had been seen in the northern hills. Not the romantic kind told in lullabies, but gaunt, desperate men who slashed throats for boiled radish and stole daughters in the night. That day, Liu Cheng watched the tree line more than usual. The rustle of branches, the way the crows circled, always 3 at a time. The fear stayed with him, even as he dug. By noon, a man from the neighbouring village passed through, bleeding from the temple, breath ragged. He was old, with eyes clouded from cataracts, but his voice carried, "They came at night, took our pigs, burned the shed." He collapsed and no one moved to help. No one dared. Harbouring a fugitive, Even one seeking aid could bring punishment from magistrates who rode into town only to collect bribes and vanish again. Liu Cheng watched him gasp and die, face pressed to the dirt. Then he went back to his hoe. By evening, his spine felt as if it had been struck with an iron rod. Malin had returned to boil the millet, now thickened into a grey, bitter porridge. They ate slowly, chewing each bite as though they could will it to be meat. Their daughter Lin Yue, no older than 6, sat silently between them. Her eyes darted often to the rafters, where a spider spun its web without fear. Afterward, Liu Cheng retrieved a worn brush and scrap of bamboo. He wrote a single line in neat strokes. "The rain has not come, the rice wilts, we wait." Then he tucked it behind a beam, a letter to no one, a journal that would never be read. At night the cold returned, the walls groaned, and somewhere far away a scream echoed over the hills. Not loud, not close, but sharp and human. They all heard it, no one spoke. Liu lay down once more beside his wife and daughter, staring into the darkness. He did not expect dreams, only silence, and another morning, if it would come. The scream, once faint and far, settled like a veil over the village as night folded in. No one ventured to speak of it the next morning. In Imperial China, silence was not cowardice, it was survival. Liu Cheng woke before the stars had, feeling the weight of the air pressing down upon him. The summer heat had returned, thick and unmoving, hanging like wet cloth over his small home. He moved with the same ritualistic pace, careful not to disturb Malin or Linhua. A hand to the cold jar, a splash of water to his face, a low sigh before tying his rope belt once more. Outside, the village was quieter than usual. Even the roosters, usually first to greet the morning, seemed reluctant. Liu walked past the shrine without offering prayer this time. Something had changed, imperceptibly, but undeniably. The trees seemed to listen. The wind held its breath. Halfway down the path to the fields, he passed the spot where the old man had died. Someone had covered the body with woven grass, but the outline remained. Liu did not stop. In his hand he carried the hoe, as if it were a staff to hold him upright, rather than a tool to feed his family. At the fields, dew coated the leaves like sorrow. Rows of crops bent slightly, not from rain, but from exhaustion. The soil beneath was brittle, cracking in lines that reminded Liu of the broken porcelain dish Malin kept hidden beneath the bedding. A gift from her grandmother, once pristine, now glued with sap and hope. Malin joined him an hour later, her steps slower than the day before. She said nothing, simply falling into rhythm beside him. They worked like two sides of the same coin, each movement mirrored, each breath in time with the other. This was love in their world. Silent endurance. Not touch, not gifts, but the unspoken pact to suffer together. By mid-morning, a government official arrived. He came not on horseback, but on foot, escorted by 2 soldiers whose eyes moved like hawks. His robes were blue and clean, his boots untouched by mud. A scroll was unrolled and read aloud in a voice too sharp for the tranquility of the fields. By order of the local magistrate, a grain levy is hereby increased by 2-fold, owing to the needs of the prefecture in the ongoing construction of His Majesty's canal. All households are to comply within 7 days. Failure shall result in confiscation. Liu Cheng stood motionless, head bowed. Around him others gathered, neighbours with faces carved by sun and fear. Not a sound was made until the official rolled up his scroll and nodded curtly. The soldiers glared once more, then turned and vanished into the road like phantoms. After they left, someone muttered, "We have no more grain." Another spat into the earth. A third cried quietly into her hands. But Liu Cheng only returned to his hoe. There was nothing else to do. Outrage was a luxury for poets. Hunger was the currency of the poor. By noon he felt the sun as a hammer on his neck. Sweat carved paths down his spine, mixing with the sting of 1,000 tiny cuts from grass and thorns. Malin had gone back to prepare something, perhaps tea if the leaves hadn't gone bad. When she returned, her face was pale. In her hands she held a bundle of cloth. Inside it lay a tiny bird, lifeless. "I found it near the well," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "No wound, just gone." They looked at it together. A sparrow, its wings still spread as though frozen mid-flight. Liu studied its feathers for a long time before nodding. He dug a small hole at the edge of the field and buried it gently, pressing his palm flat over the earth when he was done. "Even the sky is hungry," Malin said. Later that afternoon, Linhua appeared barefoot, running from the house with a slip of paper in hand. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but something stranger. She handed the paper to her father. It was from the tax collector's scribe, written in hastily brushed ink. All children above 5 shall be registered for labour enumeration. Attendance at the village record house is mandatory within 3 days. Liu felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. He did not speak. He simply looked down at Linhua, her cheeks flushed, a streak of ash on her brow from playing near the hearth. She did not understand the meaning of the letter, but she felt something shift in the way her father held it. The rest of the day passed in numbness. Even as they returned home, ate their thin porridge, and sat beneath the faint light of a single oil wick, the silence hung heavier than before. The letter rested on the table like a stone too large to lift. That night, Liu dreamed. He stood at the edge of a great river, its waters dark and churning. Across it stood Linhua, not as she was, but older, dressed in rags, her hands raw, her face smeared with dust. She reached for him, but her voice was carried away by wind. Between them, the water rose. He awoke before dawn, heart pounding, throat dry. Beside him, Meilin still slept, one hand on Linhua's back. Outside, the cicadas had gone quiet. Something was coming, not tomorrow perhaps, but soon. He stood, walked to the table, and reread the letter beneath the wick light. Then, without a word, he folded it carefully and slipped it into the same place he kept his journal scraps, beneath the rafters, next to the line he'd written the night before. He added a new one. Now they ask for the children, and still the rain does not come. The days that followed fell into an uneasy hush, as if the village itself was holding its breath. The notice about children's labour had spread quickly. Mothers whispered it into their bowls at night. Fathers stared at it as if it might burn itself away with enough silence. No one said it aloud, but they all knew what it meant. It meant the Empire's hands were reaching further into their homes, not only for their grain or their livestock, but now for their sons and daughters. To serve, to vanish into nameless labour gangs, to dig, to carry, to suffer. On the morning of the 3rd day, Liu Cheng walked slowly with Linhua to the village record house. The path was lined with trees that had once been planted by an ancestor whose name was long forgotten. Their leaves hung limp in the dry air. A cicada buzzed near his ear and was quickly lost again to the silence. Linhua clutched a small red cloth in her hands. It was her only toy, a bundle of rags with 2 black threads stitched in for eyes. She had named it Yuer, meaning little fish, because it once had a scrap of silk that fluttered like a tail, long since torn away. When they reached the record house, a crowd had already gathered. Families stood in line, children in faded tunics, some barefoot, some still too young to understand why they were there. The village headman stood near the door, shoulders stiff beneath his robe. His face bore the look of a man who had once been strong but had been slowly whittled down by years of having no choices left to make. Inside, the scribe sat at a low table, scratching ink across bamboo slips. He asked no questions, only names, ages, teeth inspected, palms studied for softness or callous. When Liu stepped forward with Linhua, the scribe looked up. "Name of child?" he asked, voice dry like a broom on stone. "Linhua," Liu replied, his voice measured. The scribe marked it down. "Age? 6 winters." The scribe paused. "She's young." Liu nodded. "Still, if her name's here, the government will decide what use to make of her." He stamped the slip with red wax. "She'll be summoned if selected. You'll know by the mark they'll paint on your door." No other words were exchanged. Liu took Linhua's hand and walked back through the crowd. Around him, others avoided his eyes. No one smiled. The only sound was the faint sobbing of a child whose name had just been added to the Empire's memory. That afternoon, Liu returned to the fields, though his body longed to be elsewhere. The crops were suffering, roots shallow in cracked soil. The millet bent too early under its own weight, weak, stunted, hopeless. He knew the harvest would not meet the new levy, but he dug anyway, sweat mixing with the dust on his skin, each motion more punishment than progress. When Meilin arrived later with a bundle of leaves and boiled barley paste, he did not speak. She sat beside him, her body still aching from the morning walk, her eyes dry but dim. "There's a merchant's cart in the east," she said softly, "near the burned grove. They say he'll trade tools for salt." Liu nodded. Salt was rare now. Even a handful could mend a cracked blade, could keep meat from rot, could bribe a gatekeeper. He chewed his paste in silence, then looked to the hills beyond the fields. Somewhere behind the haze, the road twisted toward the prefecture, toward the armies digging canals, toward the work camps where children never returned. He could not see it, but he felt its pull. That night, they spoke for the first time in weeks, without fear riding every word. "I could take her," Malin said, "to my sister's village. It's far, 2 days on foot, if we leave at night." "They'll check the roads," Liu interrupted. "Sir, if we're caught, we'll lose everything. But if she stays—" Neither of them finished the sentence. Instead, they turned to watch Linhua sleep. Her lips moved faintly as if dreaming. She still clutched Yue to her chest. Later, Liu crept outside and sat beneath the withered mulberry tree. The moon hung low, yellow like old bone. He took a scrap of bamboo and wrote again, "My daughter's name is now property of the Empire. The sky still refuses rain. My hands are cracked. My wife does not cry, but I see it in her silence. I have no weapons, only time." He tucked the writing into the space above the beam. The others were beginning to fade, the ink eaten by the damp, the words becoming ghosts. The next morning, Liu rose before the others. His feet found the path to the burned grove. As Malin had said, a cart was there, pulled not by oxen, but by a stooped man with a long braid and eyes that moved like he was counting everything and everyone at once. Liu offered the last of their salt, wrapped in cloth. The man gave him a small sickle in return, its edge chipped, but sharp enough to cut weeds or, if needed, something more. He returned before the sun had fully risen. Linhua was still asleep. Malin sat by the hearth, warming water. She looked at him but said nothing. By mid-morning, a red mark appeared on their door, a single vertical stroke, painted in haste, still dripping down the wood like blood. It meant Linhua had been chosen. Her name, read her body, claimed. The government would return within 3 days. And suddenly all the world narrowed to those 3 days. Every hour a tightening noose, every minute a heartbeat too loud. The mark on the door bled long after the paint had dried. Liu Cheng stood before it at dawn, his fingers hovering just above the crimson stroke. He did not touch it. To smear it was a crime. To erase it, treason. And yet to look upon it was to feel a kind of death set in. Not sudden, but slow, crawling beneath the ribs and wrapping around the heart. Malin sat inside, her hands trembling as she wound a thin thread through the collar of Linhua's tunic. She said she was strengthening it for travel, but her fingers betrayed the lie. They slipped, trembled, tied knots where there should have been loops. Linhua did not understand. She stood barefoot, her hair uncombed, eyes fixed on the doorway where her father lingered. In her hand, Yue the rag doll dangled limply, worn and mute. They had 3 days. The first was filled with pacing. Liu walked the village, pausing at wells and doorframes, lingering near the shrine like a man without purpose. The others avoided his eyes. No one offered comfort. There was none to give. His friend Jian, who lived 2 doors down, had once lost a son to a levy during the previous harvest. The boy had been 9. He never came back. Jian never spoke again. When Liu passed Jian's house that morning, he noticed the man sitting outside with a single plum on his lap. He did not move. He did not blink, just stared into the dirt, lips parted like he might speak, but didn't. By noon, Liu found himself at the edge of the river. The water was low, sluggish, coloured with the silt of drought. A turtle floated near the shore, belly up, limbs stiff. He watched it for a long while, then turned back toward home. Inside, Malin was still sewing, but now she hummed. It was an old tune, one her mother had sung to her when she was young. Liu hadn't heard it in years, not since Linhua's birth. She looked up when he entered. "We should prepare a bundle," she said, "for the journey." Liu said nothing. He sat and drank water from a clay bowl, warm and thick with grit. "I can go with her," Malin continued, "to the edge of the prefecture. I could." Her voice broke, barely. "I could speak to the official. Tell him she's weak, not strong enough for labour. They won't care. I have to try." That night, Liu could not sleep. He lay beside his daughter, listening to the soft huff of her breathing, the way she clutched her doll as though it were a shield. He remembered when she was born, how she had not cried at first. The midwife had smacked her feet and waited. It had taken time, long, silent moments where the world held its breath. And now, again, the silence. He rose before the sun and went to the shrine. There he took the incense stick he had been saving for the harvest festival and lit it, though his hands shook. He pressed his forehead to the cold stone and whispered, not a prayer, but a plea. Behind him the village stirred. The old widow swept her doorstep. A rooster called. The morning had come, as it always did, without care for the troubles of men. That second day passed like water in cupped hands, slow, warm, slipping away before it could be held. Malin packed a bundle. Inside, a bit of dried yam, a comb made of pine, a strip of linen with flowers drawn in faded ink. A keepsake, useless but sacred. She wrapped Yuer separately and placed it on top. For when she is cold, she said. Liu said he would go instead. Malin objected, but he insisted. He could carry more, walk farther, say less. They agreed, not because it was right, but because there were no other choices. At dusk, Linhua cried for the first time. She did not know why, only that something was ending. She sat in Malin's lap, face buried in her mother's sleeve, and sobbed without sound. Liu watched from the doorway, fists clenched. That night they did not sleep. The third morning arrived without ceremony. Just a shift in the light, a breeze that smelled faintly of ash. Liu dressed slowly. Tunic, belt, straw sandals. He tied Linhua's bundle and fastened it to a bamboo stick. Malin braided Linhua's hair in silence. When she was done, she pressed her cheek to the crown of her daughter's head and held her there, unmoving. Linhua looked between them both. She did not speak. She only held Yuer to her chest. At the threshold, Malin stopped them. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a coin, copper, worn, the face of an old emperor barely visible. Give it to her when she's frightened, she said. Liu nodded. They walked slowly through the village. Eyes followed them, but no one approached. At the edge of the fields beyond the mulberry tree, Liu paused. The road ahead wound toward the prefecture like a ribbon of dust. The sun climbed higher. In the distance, the call of a bird split the silence. And then, footsteps. From behind, heavy and deliberate. The soldiers had arrived early. Liu turned, shielding Linhua behind him. Two men approached, dressed in the dark robes of the state. Their eyes swept over him, then the girl. One raised his hand. She is the one. Liu nodded. He reached for the bundle, handing it over. Then the copper coin. He pressed it into Linhua's palm and closed her fingers around it. You'll be brave, he whispered. She nodded, eyes wide but dry. The soldiers took her hands. She did not resist. As they walked away, Liu stood still. He watched her small figure grow smaller, her black hair glinting once in the sun, her doll clutched tight. When they turned a bend and vanished, he remained there. For a long time. The sky had not wept, but in his chest a storm had begun. The house was too quiet without her. Liu Cheng returned alone beneath a sky that seemed larger than before, though not in the way that invited awe. It was a vastness that dwarfed the soul, as if the heavens were reminding him just how small and powerless he was. The sun hung high but offered no warmth. The air had the stillness of a world holding its breath. Malin waited by the door. Her eyes met his, searching, then lowered when she saw he came back with empty arms. She didn't ask. The question was already buried under layers of fear and knowing. She stepped aside to let him in. That evening, they lit the fire with old rice stalks. The flame hissed as it caught, reluctant and weak. Malin stirred a thin porridge with too much water and too little grain. Liu sat by the wall, his back pressed to the cool clay, staring at the bundle of threads that had once been Linhua's sleeping mat. Rolled up now, tied with string, as if its owner were only away for a day. Malin didn't eat. She stirred the pot and watched the flame. Her lips moved occasionally, but no sound emerged. Liu ate in slow, mechanical bites, each spoonful a bitter echo of routine. Outside, a faint wind rustled the leaves. A dog barked once in the distance. Somewhere, a child laughed, brief and high-pitched, chasing a game that Linhua might have played. The sound cut through Liu like a blade. That night, he did not sleep. He sat beside the small window, watching shadows crawl along the ground under moonlight. In the dark, the world felt less real, as though everything was simply waiting to dissolve. He held the copper coin Malin had given Linhua, returned to him by the official as a personal item. It felt warm in his hand, though the fire had long since gone out. The next morning came with ash-coloured skies. Clouds had gathered overnight, thick and promising, but rain did not fall. The air was heavy with tension, like a bowstring drawn too far. In the fields, the crops sagged with thirst. The earth cracked deeper. Even the weeds began to wither. Liu worked alone now. His neighbours kept to themselves. Grief was not something to be shared. It was to be endured quietly, lest the gods think you ungrateful for what you still had. By mid-morning, a messenger arrived in the village. He was young, cloaked in blue, with a scroll tied at his hip. He nailed a notice to the central post and left without a word. Curiosity pulled the villagers toward it in slow, cautious steps. Liu read it later, when the crowd had gone. It was a requisition notice. The Empire needed workers to reinforce the canal embankments after recent landslides. Local labour would be conscripted. Able-bodied men between the ages of 20 and 40 were to report to the outer station within 10 days. Liu was 37. He stared at the parchment until the ink blurred. Malin stood behind him, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "They'll take you next," she said. It was not a question. Liu said nothing. He returned to the fields. That night he wrote again, though his fingers ached from the day's labour. "My daughter walks roads I cannot follow. Her mat is still here. Her name echoes in every corner. Now they come for the men. I will go, not because I must, but because this is what life means here, to walk forward, even as the ground vanishes beneath you." He tucked the note beside the others. The next day he began to prepare. He fashioned a sling from old cloth to carry water. He repaired the soles of his sandals with bits of bark and twine. Malin cooked what little was left of the dried barley and wrapped it in paper. She didn't cry. She packed. Together they made silence their farewell. On the morning of the 6th day, Liu rose before the rooster. He stood by the hearth, watching the final ember die. "I'll go early," he said. Malin nodded. She handed him a pouch of salt, her last gift. At the edge of the village, he turned once to look back. The rooftops shimmered faintly in the new light. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys. Beyond them, the river was a thread of silver. And far beyond that, somewhere in the folds of mist and hills, his daughter walked a road of her own. He began to walk. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from fatigue, but from the weight of absence. With every mile, he imagined her face, not the one she wore when she was frightened, but the face she made when the wind caught her hair and she laughed without understanding the world's cruelty. He walked until the sun was high, the dust biting at his legs. Around him, others walked too, men with faces just like his, quiet and sun-worn. They did not speak. They shared no nods, just the rhythm of footsteps on earth. The road narrowed into hills, the trees thinned, and at the edge of a clearing they saw it, a checkpoint, manned by soldiers in dull armour, standing beneath the red flag of the Empire. A line of workers stretched before it, slowly being processed. Liu waited his turn, staring at the wooden sign beside the gate. It read, "To serve is to live, to resist is to vanish." When he reached the front, an officer asked his name. Liu Cheng. Village? Anyang. Age? 37. The officer stamped a slip and handed it back. "Report to Camp 21, shovel duty. You'll be moved at sundown." Liu nodded. He stepped into the camp and found his place among strangers. No one spoke. They only looked ahead, eyes trained on the horizon. A bird cried overhead, and the sun, as always, offered no comfort. The camp smelled of sweat, clay, and smoke. Not the fragrant, curling smoke of home fires, but the heavy, damp stench of green wood burning low and slow, choking instead of warming. It clung to the clothes, crept into hair, coated the skin like another layer of dust. Liu Cheng stood among the newly arrived labourers, each man marked by silence, shoulders bowed not from obedience, but from the long habit of endurance. Camp 21 was a shallow basin dug into the foot of a forested hill, with earth walls on 3 sides and a stagnant canal on the 4th. Around its perimeter, bamboo huts leaned against one another like men too tired to stand alone. At the centre stood a large tent with red banners, where the overseers dwelled, separate and higher, as though proximity to hardship might infect them. That first day, Liu was handed a shovel with a split handle, the wood patched with old cloth, sticky with sweat from many hands. A man beside him, thin and sunburned, nodded once. "You'll bleed," he said without looking up. "All do." They were herded like oxen to the canal edge, where the embankment had collapsed during the last rain, leaving a gash of mud and water the width of a house. It was here that Liu would work, digging and hauling, refilling the void with baskets of packed earth, one after another, as the sun climbed and fell without mercy. There were no breaks, only moments stolen when the guards looked away. No water but what was doled out mid-morning, a bowl passed hand to hand, cloudy and warm. Liu drank, not from thirst, but because not drinking would mark him as weak. By evening his hands were blistered, his back swollen with pain. He collapsed beside the fireless hearth of the hut he now shared with 6 others. None of them spoke. One moaned softly in his sleep, twitching like a dog dreaming of freedom. Another scratched endlessly at a rash on his arm, skin broken and raw. The others simply lay still, eyes open, waiting for a night that never truly brought rest. Liu dreamed that night of a woman's voice calling his name from across the fields. When he turned, he saw no one, only the empty stalks bending under windless skies. At dawn the gong rang, 3 dull beats that stirred the camp like a slap. Liu rose with the others, muscles stiff, eyes heavy. A guard shouted orders, his voice slicing the morning fog. No talking, no stopping. 8 baskets before midday or you'll miss rations. They marched again to the canal, shovels in hand, breath shallow. The embankment looked the same, broken and vast, but the faces were subtly changed, more sunken, more hollow. Midway through the morning, a man collapsed. His name was Tian, from a village further north. He had been there 3 days longer than Liu. His knees gave way as he lifted a load, and he fell forward into the mud, his breath ragged. No one helped. They'd seen what happened to those who did. A guard approached, struck him twice with a rod, then dragged him to the side. He was left there until sundown, unmoving. That evening, Liu found a place near the edge of the camp where the reeds grew tall. He squatted low and reached into his tunic, pulling out the copper coin once more. He stared at it in the dying light. He imagined Linhua, where she might be, what task they had given her. Was she washing linens in cold water with raw hands, hauling stones for roads too grand for peasants to walk? Was she hungry? Had anyone spoken kindly to her? The coin felt heavier. He took a broken reed and began carving into the clay wall near him. Just 3 characters, her name, Linhua. Then he sat still until the stars emerged, blinking faintly through a veil of smoke. The 3rd day brought rain. Not the quenching kind, but a miserable drizzle that soaked clothes and turned the dirt path into a slick, clinging mess. The baskets grew heavier, the men grew slower. The guards grew more cruel. Liu fell once, his sandal torn on a sharp stone, sending him tumbling face first into the slurry. Laughter rose from one of the soldiers. He waited for the blow that would follow, but it didn't come. Instead, another man stepped forward, helped him up, and returned to digging. No words passed between them. That night, Liu gave the man half of his boiled yam. It was all he had. The man nodded once, wiped his hands on his tunic and whispered, "My daughter's gone too. Taken last spring." It was the first true sentence Liu had heard in days. He didn't reply. The rain continued into the 4th morning, cold, unending. Spirits frayed. Men wept silently in their sleep. One slit his wrist with a sharpened spoon and was gone by dawn. No burial. Just dragged to the woods like rubbish. On the 5th day, Liu found his body beginning to harden to the labour. The shovel no longer felt alien. The baskets no longer seemed to mock his weakness. He still ached, but it was a dull ache, one he could carry without complaint. And with that ache came a numbness. Not peace, not acceptance. Just the soft, silent dread of permanence. That night he returned to the reed wall and added more marks beneath Linhua's name. A line for each day she had been gone, a line for each breath he still drew. He did not know how many more lines he would draw, only that he would return each night while he still could and carve them into the clay, not for memory, not for meaning, but because to mark the days was the only defiance left. On the 6th day the sun returned, not as a blessing, but as an oppressor. It blazed over Camp 21 like a judgment, drawing the stink of sweat and rot from every corner. The mud hardened underfoot, cracking in jagged lines that made each step uncertain. The air shimmered with heat. Flies gathered around the waste trench in a black cloud, their buzzing rising and falling like the hum of distant drums. Liu Cheng had not spoken since his exchange with the man who'd shared his grief. He did not need to. In the camp, silence was its own language. It said, "I see you. I hurt like you. I endure beside you." Each man dug not only for the empire, but for his own survival. The overseers offered no praise, only punishment. Quotas rose with the temperature. Those who failed to meet them were denied water, beaten or humiliated before the others. On that day, a boy no older than 15 collapsed near Liu. His name was Ji. He had arrived from a fishing village near the coast, his body thin from months of seasickness and hunger. He fell with a soft thud, arms splayed, mouth slack. Liu hesitated, then moved. He dropped his shovel and reached for the boy, lifting him gently from the ground, cradling his head to shield it from the dry stone. Ji's lips moved faintly, the breath too shallow to carry sound. A shout cracked through the air. One of the overseers stormed toward them, rod in hand, face red with sun and fury. "Back to your work!" Liu looked up. "He needs water," he said, his voice rough from disuse. The rod came down across his back, once, twice. Liu did not move. "He needs water," he said again. Another strike, then a pause. The overseer looked down at him, chest heaving, unsure if further punishment was worth the effort. Around them, the other workers had stopped, not out of rebellion, but curiosity. They were watching the outcome, calculating, weighing. Finally, the overseer spat. "Leave him, then. Let the worms drink him." But he did not strike again. When the man walked away, Liu remained with the boy until night. Ji never opened his eyes. At dusk, he breathed his last, and Liu covered his body with loose earth from the canal bank. He marked the place with a single broken stick and nothing more. That night, Liu returned to the reed wall. His hands were shaking. He carved Linua's name again, just above the others, not to replace them, just to remember the sound of it. Malin had once told him on the night Linua was born that names carried spirit, that to speak them aloud was to keep a soul warm. He could not speak hers here, not among soldiers and death, but he could write it, again and again. Let the wall remember what the wind was not allowed to carry. The seventh day brought dust. A dry wind blew from the northwest, carrying with it the scent of far-off fires, burned fields perhaps, or another village punished for a failed levy. The sky turned yellow, eyes burned, skin cracked. The men worked slower now, backs hunched, movements dulled by exhaustion. One by one they began to disappear. Some were reassigned to other camps, others simply never returned from latrine breaks. Whether they had escaped, died, or been taken elsewhere, no one knew, no one asked. Absence, like everything else in the camp, became part of the landscape. Liu worked with fewer around him. The silence became deeper, the air thicker. On the 8th day, a rumour surfaced. A foreman whispered it to one of the senior diggers in the early hours. The canal was ahead of schedule. The government was considering relocating workers to new roadworks in the south, near the mountains, where fever was known to kill within days. It was said the soil there grew mould on the skin, that men coughed until they bled, that bodies were buried to a hole, or left above ground when the labourers themselves were too weak to dig graves. That night, no fires were lit. Liu sat in the dark, his hands wrapped around his knees, rocking slightly. He had not thought of escape. There was no escape. The mountains were far. The guards were armed. The roads watched. But fear had begun to bloom. Not fear for himself, but for the fragility of what little remained inside him. He dreamed again of Linhua. In the dream, she stood in a grove of bamboo, wearing a white robe too large for her frame. Her hands were empty. Her doll was gone. She looked older. Her eyes were tired. "Did you forget me?" she asked. "No," Liu whispered. She looked at him sadly. "But you stopped speaking my name." He awoke with tears dried on his cheeks. The 9th day was long. The sun was hot again. Liu could barely hold his shovel. His blisters had burst and hardened into calluses. His lips bled when he smiled. And yet he smiled. A bird had landed near the canal, a small yellow thing with a bent wing. It stayed for minutes, hopping in the dust, searching for something unseen. Then it flew away, a bit lopsided, but alive. He watched it go and felt something stir in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but something close. That night he carved again. Not Linhua's name this time, not a tally, but a word. Light. He sat beneath the stars, the copper coin in his palm. He thought of Malin, of her quiet strength, of how she had stitched the collar of Linhua's tunic with shaking hands and still managed to hum. He missed the sound of that hum, and in the windless night for just a moment he thought he heard it. The 10th day began with thunder, though no rain followed. The sky had turned the colour of bruised fruit, deep purple, tinged with ochre, and the clouds hung low, as if they might fall to earth and smother everything below. But the heavens, like the Empire, gave only sound and no relief. Liu Cheng awoke before the gong. The camp around him still lay in its unnatural stillness, bodies curled and motionless in the dust, breaths shallow, silent. He rose without a word, without thought, as if pulled by something older than memory. He walked to the canal edge and dipped his hands into the water, now muddy and slow. It had shrunk since the day he arrived. The embankment they had laboured to rebuild was already beginning to erode again, the rains too few, the burden too great. Still, the overseers shouted as if progress could be willed into existence with volume alone. A voice called to him then, soft and careful. "Liu Cheng." He turned. The man who had helped him days ago, the one who had shared his yam, stood a few paces away. His name was Bo. He had a deep scar along his chin and eyes that seemed to hold more years than his skin would admit. Bo approached, glancing once to ensure no guards watched. Then he knelt beside Liu. "There's talk," he said in a low whisper. "Tonight, after the last count." Liu didn't need to ask. Escape. Bo looked to the east, toward the thickets beyond the latrines. "There's a stream that runs behind the ridge," he continued. "Old trail, not used since the last plague. I know the path. A few of us, we're going." Liu said nothing. His hands were still in the water, cold now, as if the canal had suddenly remembered it was part of a mountain's blood. Bo waited, then stood. "If you don't come, I understand, but decide before dark." He walked away, leaving only footprints in the dry dust. Liu sat for a long time. He thought of Linhua, of Mei Lin's last glance, standing in the doorway, her hands folded so tightly the knuckles had turned white. He imagined her rising each morning, looking at the door as if someone might knock with news. He thought of the copper coin, the rag doll, the humming. He returned to work, swinging the shovel without urgency. Let the overseers shout. Let them scowl. Let the quotas stack like stones on his back. His body moved, but his mind was elsewhere, tracing the unseen stream, imagining the feel of leaves brushing against his arms instead of dirt clogging his fingernails. By afternoon, one of the guards fell ill. The news passed through the camp like smoke. He had drunk from the wrong bucket. Fever came quick. He stumbled mid-command, collapsed by the fire, and was dragged away by 2 others. No replacement came. The watch that night would be thinner. Liu carved one final mark into the wall behind the reeds. Not a name, not a word. Just a small fish, etched with uneven lines, the shape of Linhua's toy, Yue. When night fell, the camp exhaled. The final gong rang. The count was taken. Lanterns were lit along the central path, flickering in the dry wind. Then silence, heavy, waiting. Liu did not return to his hut. He walked instead toward the latrines, head bowed, as if on some late errand. He moved slowly, every step deliberate, never too fast. Behind him, no footsteps followed. Ahead, the thickets rustled faintly in the breeze. Bo was waiting near a fallen log, crouched low. With him were 3 others, young, thin, eyes wide with fear but set with purpose. One carried a small satchel. Another had wrapped cloth around his feet to muffle the sound. Bo looked at Liu. "You came." Liu nodded. And then they moved, slow at first, slipping between trees, crouching low beneath ferns, breath caught in throats. The air was thick with heat and the scent of wet moss. Each branch creaked like a warning. Each distant owl call was a potential alarm. They climbed the ridge in silence. The earth shifted beneath them, slick with years of fallen leaves. One of the young men slipped and caught himself, breathing heavily. Bo motioned for them to pause near a narrow stream, shallow, but fast-moving. He dipped a cloth into the water and sucked it. The others did the same. Liu crouched by the stream and stared into its flow, watching the silver strands curl past his fingers. "It's another hour," Bo said, "then the old road. After that, if we're not caught, there's a farm village. They don't ask questions." Liu looked to the trees. They moved again, faster now, confidence growing with each bend in the trail. The wind shifted. The moon slipped behind clouds. The night folded around them like a blanket. And then, just as they reached a clearing, a crack echoed through the trees. Not thunder. A voice, barked, sharp. A torch flared behind them. Bo hissed, "Run." They scattered. Liu ran, his sandals tore. Thorns clawed his legs. The woods blurred into shadows and branches and breath. He did not think. He did not pray. He did not feel pain. Only forward. He ran until his lungs burned, until the trees thinned, until the sound of pursuit faded behind him like a fading bell. And when he stopped, Knees buckling beneath him, he fell into tall grass and stared at the stars. He had escaped, but he had no direction. No map, no coin, only his name, and hers, Linois. He closed his eyes and whispered it into the grass, a name to keep his soul warm. The grass was wet with dew when Liu Cheng awoke. His body ached with the kind of pain that comes not from one night's run, but from the piling of years, of hunger, of fear. He did not know how long he had slept. The sky above him was just beginning to brighten, the stars paling one by one, melting into the grey. He moved slowly, testing each limb. His ankles were scraped, his left foot swollen, the skin torn where the sandal had split. His palms were stained brown from mud and dried blood. Yet he stood, because the stillness of the earth around him did not promise safety. Stillness in a land ruled by silence could be dangerous. He had learned this in the camp and long before. The clearing where he lay was bordered by tall reeds and whispering bamboo, and beyond them he could just see the curve of low hills. He knew little of the roads this far south, but if Bo had been right, if they had taken the old plague trail, there would be a village nearby. A farming place, small and poor, where strangers were viewed with suspicion but perhaps not reported. He moved through the underbrush slowly, favouring his injured foot. Each step was measured, every sound studied. At the edge of a thicket he crouched and waited, letting the insects return to their song, letting the birds ignore him. Only when the air had settled did he rise again. By mid-morning he found a path, faint and overgrown, little more than a memory of travel. He followed it until it widened, turning into the kind of dirt road worn down by carts and decades. He saw footprints, some recent, others washed partially away by long-ago rain. He pressed his hand to one, felt the still cool indentation, and guessed it had been left just before dawn. The village revealed itself gradually. First the smell, wood smoke and damp hay, then the sound of chickens, and finally the sight of rooftops, low and thatched, crouched between rows of millet and a scattering of vegetable gardens. It was no more than 20 homes, perhaps fewer, huddled around a well. Liu stood at the edge, hidden behind a young pine, watching. 2 women carried buckets from the well. A child played with a stick near a pig pen. A man bent low to tie a goat's leg for washing. No soldiers, no banners, no sound of drums or authority, only the small rhythm of survival. He waited until the sun was fully up, then approached slowly, head bowed, shoulders slouched in the posture of a weary traveller. He did not hide. He let the lines on his face and the filth on his clothes tell his story before words could. The first to see him was a boy, no older than 8. He watched Liu with the wide eyes of those who had been taught caution. When Liu smiled softly, the boy said nothing, only ran toward one of the homes. Moments later, a man stepped out to meet him. Older, perhaps 50, with a stiff gait and a face that had been carved by wind and time. His hands were knotted like roots. "Where from?" the man asked. His voice was not unkind. Liu hesitated. "West, from the canal camps." The man's expression didn't change. He nodded once. "They're moving people south. Some say the fever's already taken 1 crew whole." Liu said nothing. "You bring trouble with you?" "No," Liu answered. "Only my feet." The man considered this. "You'll need to wash." He motioned to the trough near the goats. Liu nodded and moved toward it. The water was brown, but he drank a handful before rinsing his arms, his face, then sitting beside the wooden frame to rest. The villagers kept their distance but did not jeer. That was enough. He was invisible again, and in this world invisibility was safer than welcome. Later, the same man returned. He handed Liu a bowl of congee, thin and nearly tasteless, but warm. Liu bowed his head and ate in silence. The man sat beside him. "You looking to stay?" "I don't know," Liu answered truthfully. "We don't ask questions, but if you work, we don't mind company." Liu glanced up. "I can work." The man stood. "Name's Shen." "Liu." That night, Shen offered him a place beneath his shed, dry straw, a coarse blanket, and an old gourd filled with water. Liu accepted with gratitude he did not voice. He slept not as one healed, but as one briefly sheltered. The days passed without incident. Liu helped haul water, cleared weeds, mended a broken fence post with twine and a bent nail. He didn't speak unless spoken to, and the villagers returned the courtesy. Shen never asked about the camp again, and Liu never offered the truth. But sometimes when they worked side by side, Shen would speak of his own losses, of his son who had been sent east to build roads for the Empire and who never returned, of the droughts, the locusts, the things endured. And in those moments, Liu felt less alone. On the fourth evening, as he sat carving small shapes into a stick, a habit that kept his hands steady, Shen approached with something wrapped in cloth. "It's not much," he said, placing the bundle beside him. "Found it in my son's things." Inside was a child's sash, faded red, embroidered with 2 white fish. Liu stared at it. "I thought maybe you might need to remember someone," Shen said, then walked away. Liu ran his fingers along the stitches. The fish were crude, uneven, but one of them looked just like the little carving he'd left in the clay wall behind the reeds. Yuer. He wrapped the sash carefully and pressed it to his chest. That night, as the stars returned and the wind curled through the branches, Liu whispered her name again. Not with sorrow, not with grief, but as if she were listening. The days grew longer in the village of mist and millet. The rains that had threatened for weeks finally came, not in torrents, but in a steady, grey drizzle that softened the edges of roofs and pathways and turned the dry earth into mud that clung to ankles and wheels alike. It was not enough to save the season, but it was enough to bring green back to the beans and a soft shimmer to the rice shoots still fighting in the flooded paddies. Liu Cheng remained. He rose before dawn each day, never needing to be called. His body still carried the memory of the camp gong, that sound that had once carved the hours of his life into unyielding duty. Now, there was no gong, only birdsong and the rustling of bamboo when the wind shifted. He would slip from his straw bed beneath Shen's shed, stretch his limbs against the cold, and begin his tasks without prompting. He carried water in twin pails that left damp arcs on his shoulders. He helped the women carry firewood and fed the goats when their keepers were too old to lift the grain. No one asked him to do these things, but no one stopped him either, and so each day he earned his invisibility with quiet labour. Shen rarely spoke much. He was not a man of wasted breath, but once, while they watched the smoke rise from a neighbour's cooking fire, he said, "If you stay long enough, you'll be seen." Liu had nodded. "And if I'm seen? Then you'll have to decide who you are." In the soft soil near the edge of the field, Liu found a patch of ground he began to tend himself. It had once been used for pumpkins, but had since gone to weeds. With quiet devotion, he pulled the roots and turned the soil. The work brought no food at first, only blisters, but it gave his hands a task that belonged to him and no one else. Each evening he returned to his place beneath the shed. There, by the fading light, he would unwrap the red sash with the twin white fish and place it gently on his chest as he lay down. He never spoke when he held it. He only closed his eyes and allowed himself to remember, not just the sorrow, but the softness, the sound of Lin Hua's bare feet on stone, the way her laugh rose when Meilin tickled her under the arms, the sleepy slur of her voice when she asked him to tell stories of the river dragons. One evening, Shen brought news. "A man passed through today from east of the prefecture. He said there's word of sickness, children falling ill in the camps." Liu's heart clenched. "What camps?" he asked. "Canal camps, road crews, warehouses. Said some were sent to silk mills, some to grain caravans." "Children?" Shen nodded. "All taken from the provinces. Some die, some just disappear." That night, Liu could not sleep. He sat beneath the eaves and watched the stars, eyes unblinking, body taut. He had accepted the stillness because it was survival. But now the stillness mocked him. What if she was sick? What if she was alone in a warehouse, coughing in the dark, fingers curled around nothing? What if she had cried for him, and he had not come? The next morning he made a decision. He packed a small bundle, dried yam, a half-gourd of water, the red sash, and a length of string he had braided from flax. He folded the sash into the deepest pocket of his tunic. Shen found him before he left. "You're going?" Liu nodded. "You won't find what you hoped to find." "I have to look." Shen did not argue. He handed Liu a thin cane staff and a worn map, drawn in charcoal on parchment, old but still legible. "This won't take you far, but it'll help you avoid the wrong roads." Liu took it. Before he left, he stood once more in his small patch of earth, brushing the dirt from his fingers. A single sprout had pushed through. Just one. He didn't know if it would live, but he left it all the same. The road east wound between hills and paddies, then narrowed into valleys carved by ancient floods. Liu walked for days, sleeping beneath trees, drinking from streams, asking little and offering less. Villagers along the way were wary. The sight of a lone man, thin, calloused, silent, set tongues whispering. He told them nothing, only bartered help for food where he could. In one village, he mended a roof. In another, he helped bury an old woman whose son had died years before. At a roadside shrine, he knelt and whispered Linhua's name again, offering the last crumb of barley cake he had saved. By the end of the third week, he reached the edge of the eastern prefecture. The landscape changed. The fields became thinner, the trees more sparse. Smoke rose from guarded camps beyond bamboo walls. The air smelled of cloth dye, vinegar, sweat, and something metallic like coins left too long in rain. He found an old trader near a well, sharpening a blade against a whetstone. The man watched Liu approach without fear. "You looking for work?" the trader asked. "I'm looking for someone." "Who?" "My daughter." The trader studied him. If she was taken, there are 5 places they might have sent her. Warehouse up north, silk mill in the forest, dye house by the river, tannery, or the caravan barns. Which one takes girls her age? All of them. Liu nodded. "How far?" The trader pointed to the mountains. "That way." Liu bowed. "Thank you." Before he left, the trader called after him. "Don't be fooled. They say the worst place is the one with no fences." Liu turned. "Why?" "Because people don't run from there." That night, Liu made a fire in the woods beyond the road. He took out the sash and held it up to the flames, not to burn it, but to watch the fish glow red in the flickering light. He whispered her name again. Linhua. He would search each camp, each mill, each dark corridor and stinking dormitory. He did not carry hope, not the soft, golden kind that comforts the heart, but the sharp, relentless kind that refuses to yield. Because somewhere out there, his daughter might still be waiting for someone to speak her name. The mountains rose like sleeping giants on the horizon, their backs curved under mist and time. Liu Cheng's feet were blistered and cracked by the time he reached the foot of the first ridge. The path wound upward in steep, breathless angles, lined with loose stone and the bones of ancient tree roots. The staff Shen had given him was now his third leg, thumping softly against the ground with each step. He moved slowly, pausing often to rest beneath branches that whispered secrets in the wind. He carried no illusions. He did not believe Linhua would be waiting for him at the first mill, smiling in her patched tunic, hair neatly braided. He only hoped she was alive. That was enough. To begin with life, even worn and thin, was more than most fathers had after the Empire took their children. At the summit of the second hill, Liu found the first sign, a narrow wooden plank nailed to a tree, its characters weathered but still legible. River house for dye workers, east path. He turned toward it. The forest thickened quickly. The trees here were broad and tangled, leaves hanging low, thick vines weaving like serpents across the path. The light dimmed under the canopy, birds fell silent, the ground squelched beneath his feet, soaked by hidden springs and years of forgotten rain. Then he saw it, half hidden in the trees, a long, low building with slatted windows and smoke curling from behind its roof. Faded red characters marked the side, Province Dye Works, Ward 3. He crouched in the underbrush, heart hammering. A cart rolled past on the gravel road beside the building, drawn by oxen, loaded with barrels. 2 guards stood by the gate, bamboo staves in hand. Their postures were lazy, indifferent, not cruel, but bored. This was not a prison, but neither was it free. He waited until dusk before moving. In the failing light, the trees threw long shadows that wrapped around the building like arms. Liu circled to the far side, away from the road, where the wall was broken in places and vines hung over collapsed beams. He slipped through a gap near the foundation and found himself crouched beside a water channel, the air thick with the scent of ash and iron. The women were gathering there, dozens of them. Most were no older than 15. Their hands were stained purple and red, their eyes rimmed with exhaustion. They moved like ghosts, quick, silent, practiced. Some carried buckets, others stirred vats beneath a wooden awning. Their tunics were dyed from the splashes, skin raw from the chemicals. Liu's breath caught. Each face he scanned with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for driftwood. He watched every braid, every limp, every slight tilt of the head. But none of them were Linhua. Still, he waited. Hours passed. The night deepened. A bell rang, shrill and metallic. The girls lined up, received their rations, and filed into a narrow dormitory behind the vats. A single lantern lit their path. One by one, they disappeared inside. Liu remained hidden in the trees. It was near midnight when he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned, heart leaping, but it was not her. A woman stood there, older than the others, wearing a threadbare shawl. "You're not from here," she said, voice low. Her accent thick with the dust of another province. "No," Liu answered. "You're looking for someone." "My daughter," she nodded. "They all are." He looked at her closely. Her skin was mottled with dye burns. Her eyes were tired but not unkind. "She's 6. Name's Lin Hua." The woman sat on a rock and shook her head. "No one that young here. Youngest girl is 10. They send the little ones elsewhere." "Where?" "Silk work, sometimes. Textile caravans. Some to temple laundries if they're lucky. If not." She trailed off. "I just want to know she's alive," Liu said. The woman looked at him for a long moment. "Most don't come looking," she said finally. "You're either brave or broken." He didn't answer. She stood, brushing dust from her knees. "There's a man at the temple crossroads. Name's Gao. He's blind, but he knows the traders. The routes. He talks too much. Maybe he's heard your girl's name." "How far?" 2 days east, if your legs still hold you." She began to walk away, then stopped. "Leave before dawn. Guards change at second bell. Don't let them see your face." And then she was gone, swallowed by trees. Liu did not sleep. He watched the windows of the dormitory until the lantern burned low, then vanished. He waited for a sound, a movement, a cry, but there was only stillness. Before the sun rose, he slipped back into the forest, walking east. He crossed a shallow stream at midday, the water cool and sharp against his skin. He ate nothing, drank only once. His thoughts were no longer on rest or distance. They were on a name, Gao. And the question that gnawed at him as he walked, bleeding from the ankles and burning with every step, had Lin Hua spoken her name to anyone? And if she had, would they remember? The road to the temple crossroads was older than memory, carved not by design but by repetition, by feet, hooves, wheels and time. It wound like a ribbon through hills and forest and faded orchards where plum trees bloomed wild and untended, their fruit falling silently to rot beneath leaves. Liu Cheng moved along it in slow, dogged rhythm, his body more shadow than man. His tunic was stiff with dried sweat. His staff left small prints in the soft mud. He did not look up often. His eyes searched the ground ahead, wary of snakes, wary of cracks. The world felt precarious, fragile in its quietness, like a drumskin stretched too tightly. By the second day, the hills parted, revealing a flat plain where a series of stone pavilions stood like forgotten teeth in the earth. Their roofs had long since collapsed and vines climbed freely over the prayer stones. But beyond them, Liu saw it, a single standing temple. Low, whitewashed roof tiles green with moss. A small bell hung in its frame, unmoving in the still air. And there, under a tree shaped like a shepherd's crook, sat a man in robes the colour of dust, his head bowed slightly, a cane resting beside him. Liu approached with care. "You are Gao?" he asked. The man lifted his head. His eyes were white and filmed over, but they blinked with life. "I've been many things," he said with a faint smile. "But yes, I am Gao today." He patted the stone beside him. "Sit. You smell like desperation." Liu hesitated, then sat. The stone was cool, smoothed by centuries of waiting. "I'm looking for my daughter," he said, "taken by the state collectors, sent east. Her name is Lin Hua." The blind man nodded slowly. 6 years old? Yes. Small for her age? Yes. Hair in twin braids, one always a little crooked? Liu stared. "You've seen her?" Gao tilted his head. "Not with these eyes, no. But I hear things. People think the blind can't listen. They say more when they believe no one sees them." He tapped his cane lightly against the root of the tree. "About a month ago, a caravan passed through, cloth and grain, bound for the southern temples. Had a handful of conscripted children riding in the last wagon, too small for field work, too young for mills. Temple laundries, most likely. The monks buy their service for coins and silence." "Did they say her name?" One guard called to a girl. "Lin Hua, stop wriggling." "That's all I heard." Liu's breath caught. "Where?" he asked. "The third temple on the water road," Gao said. "Past the salt flats, white walls, red bell. They call it Temple of Quiet Flame. It's 2 days on foot, one if your desperation outruns your blisters." Liu stood. Gao chuckled. Wait, Liu turned. Do you want advice? Gao asked. No. Good, I'll give it anyway. Don't let them see your fear. Temple men are gentle until they're not, and girls who don't cry are noticed more. Liu bowed deeply. Thank you. Return one day, Gao said. Tell me she remembered her name. Liu nodded once and turned eastward, his steps quickened by the thrum of something deeper than hope. The salt flats appeared like a wound in the landscape, wide, pale, and endless. The sky above them stretched into a mirror, and Liu's shadow marched beside him like a silent companion. There was no shade, no sound. Only the crunch of crusted salt beneath his sandals and the hiss of wind dragging itself across the plains. He walked through the heat of day, through the trembling dusk, and reached the first lantern post by nightfall. The Temple of Quiet Flame stood beyond a grove of cypress trees, its gate half open, its courtyard flickering with the light of oil lamps. Incense drifted on the wind, sweet, heavy. It coated his tongue as he approached. He waited by the gate until a novice monk appeared, head shaved, robes white, eyes careful. I'm here for work, Liu said. I can clean, carry, mend. The monk studied him. We have enough hands. I won't eat much, Liu said. I just need a place to kneel. The monk tilted his head, sensing something unsaid, but gestured inside. You may stay in the garden shed. If you cause trouble, the river will carry you away. Liu bowed. Understood. That night he slept on a mat of reeds, the red sash clutched beneath his chest. He listened to the chants echo through the halls, low and rhythmic, ancient and hollow. He dreamt of water pouring over cloth, of small hands wringing linen, of a single braid curled against the neck. At dawn he rose and took his place with the groundskeepers. He scrubbed stones, polished brass, emptied ash pots. He did not speak unless spoken to. By the second day he found them. The laundry house stood behind the main shrine, near the river where the temple women washed ceremonial robes and bedding. He waited by the wooden gate, pretending to fix a broken hinge, and watched as a line of girls passed through with baskets of wet cloth. There were 7 of them. One walked slightly behind the others. Her head was down. Her hair was darker than he remembered. But it was braided, and the left braid tilted just so. She carried a small doll made of reed string tucked into her waistband. Liu's heart stopped. She turned once, just briefly, and looked toward the gate. He did not speak. He did not run. He only looked back and slowly, carefully pressed his palm to his chest. The girl stared. Her eyes narrowed, then widened. And in that moment, without sound, without proof, without name, he knew. She remembered. Liu Cheng did not move. He stood beside the gate with his hands still pressed to his chest, the place where the red sash now rested beneath his tunic, close to his heart. The girl, Linhua, had already turned away, her braid swaying gently with each step as she disappeared into the shadows of the laundry house. The river wind stirred slightly, lifting the incense smoke that curled along the temple eaves. His legs trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer weight of what he had seen. She lived. She had not spoken, had not smiled, had not run to him. But she had looked. And in her eyes, those wide, almond-shaped eyes that had once studied ants crawling on stones and watched the stars while wrapped in her mother's shawl, he had seen it. Recognition. It took all the strength he had not to follow her then and there, not to shout her name, not to sweep her into his arms and abandon all disguise. But that would bring the temple guards. That would end everything. The monks would call him mad, a vagabond, a thief of persons. They would send her away or punish them both. He had come too far for haste, so he returned to his work. For the rest of that day, he polished bronze bowls until he could see the outline of his own face in them. He hauled ash from the incense pits and spread it beneath the cypress trees to nourish the soil. He scrubbed steps in silence, and the other keepers let him be. But every hour he watched the laundry house. At sunset, the girls filed out again, their baskets lighter now, their hands pruned and sore. Linhua was near the end again, her braid damp, her doll still tucked into her sash. She did not look up this time. Liu let her go. The rhythm must not break. That night, he returned to the reed mat and sat cross-legged, the sash unfolded before him like a prayer. His fingers trembled as he ran them along the twin white fish. The cloth smelled faintly of sweat, wood smoke, and something older, perhaps hope itself. He stayed awake until the moon rose high and silvered the walls of the temple. The next morning he returned early to the path by the laundry house. A novice monk passed by, carrying bundles of folded robes. Liu bowed his head and offered to help. The monk, surprised by the gesture, handed over a bundle and nodded. That small act brought Liu closer. He was assigned to the rear steps of the laundry house that day. Not inside, but near. He swept in silence, eyes averted, movements slow. The temple trusted quiet men who did their work without questions. Liu knew how to be invisible. He had practiced it for months. Around mid-morning, a sound caught his ear, a splash of water, then a giggle, then a voice. Soft, light, so faint he feared he imagined it. Another girl spoke. "What's your doll's name again?" Linhua's voice answered, "Yue." Liu's hands froze on the broom handle. The name had survived. The doll, nothing but reed and thread, had become her shield. A piece of home wrapped in string. He lowered his head and swept slower, letting the tears form without falling. He would not make a sound. Later, when the girls passed him again, Linhua paused for just a second. Not long enough to be noticed by the others. But her hand reached to the sash at her waist, touched the doll gently, and then moved on. It was a message. I remember. The days that followed passed like threads pulled tight. Liu learned the schedule. Which monk watched the laundry gate, when the girls ate, when they bathed. He timed his work to these rhythms, each action deliberate. Never too close, never too often. Just enough to be seen, but not remembered. Then, one evening, it changed. He was called to the abbot's chamber. The summons came through a novice, who led him through the winding halls of the temple to a quiet room filled with scrolls and the scent of sandalwood. The abbot was an old man with a face like weathered paper and a voice soft as falling ash. "You've been here a week," he said, not looking up from his writing. "You speak little. You work hard." Liu bowed. "But I wonder," the abbot continued, "why you truly came." Liu kept his gaze on the floor. "I had nothing left. Many come here with less than nothing and leave with peace. I'm not ready for peace." The abbot looked at him then. "You carry grief like a sack of stones. I carry a name." The abbot paused, then nodded slowly. "We all do." He said nothing more, simply waved his hand in dismissal. That night, Liu returned to his mat and slept with the sash curled beneath his hand. He dreamed of the river, not the canal, not the salt flats, but the stream behind his old home, where Linhua once caught tadpoles with her bare hands and shouted in triumph over each one. In the dream, she turned to him and said, "I'm not cold anymore," and he awoke with the moonlight on his face. He could not stay long. He knew that. Eventually, someone would see the shape of his grief and ask the wrong questions. And when that happened, Linhua would be taken again, or worse, punished for the story she had not yet told. He had to find a way to see her, to speak her name aloud just once. Liu Cheng began to count the days again. It had been 12 since he first saw Linhua's eyes look into his. 12 days since that silent flicker of memory passed between them, unspoken yet irrefutable. Each morning since, he had worked along the edges of her world, repairing gates, hauling wood, cleaning the tiled paths that lined the laundry house. Never inside, never closer than the shadows would allow. But he was there, like the quiet breath of wind through cypress branches, and every day she noticed. A glance over her shoulder, a hand pressed to the reed doll. Once, as she passed the broom in his hands, her fingers brushed the wooden handle ever so slightly. It was not accidental, it was not bold, it was enough. The temple remained unaware. To the monks, he was a man of few words, humble and tireless. He ate sparingly, never demanded, never lingered near the prayer halls. He slept in the garden shed each night and was the first to rise with the rustle of morning bells. His hands grew darker from ash and labour, but his mind sharpened. He was waiting. On the 13th night, he returned from the courtyard to find a folded scrap of cloth tucked beneath his mat. No one saw him retrieve it. No one had seen it placed. It was not paper. Paper was precious. But a corner of discarded laundry wrapping, stiff with starch and age. On it, drawn in thin, careful strokes, was a picture. 2 small fish side by side, one slightly larger than the other. Beneath them, a single character. Here. His hands trembled. He pressed the cloth to his lips. The tears came slow, not in waves, but in silence. There was no sound in the garden shed that night, but the soft exhale of a man who had nearly forgotten what hope felt like. The next day, he did not go to the laundry steps. He waited instead behind the incense storehouse, a quiet place near the southern wall where temple boys often threw away broken lanterns and burnt joss sticks. At dusk, when the light was golden and the air smelled of rain, she came. Not running, not afraid, just walking, her steps slow and even, her braid tied neatly, the doll still tucked into her sash. She stopped 2 paces from him. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Baba?" He nodded, his voice caught in his throat. "Yes." She stepped forward and put her hand on his. Her fingers were smaller than he remembered, thinner, rough from work, but they were hers. Her eyes brimmed with tears but did not fall. "I thought you were gone." "I came," he said. "I came as fast as I could." She looked down, her lips trembling. "They said we were being taken to the palace to help with the linens, but it was only strangers, men with scrolls. They said we belong to the Emperor now." "You don't," he said. "You belong to yourself and to us. You're my daughter." She reached into her sash and pulled out the sash he had once given her. The red cloth, faded and frayed, with the fish embroidered in uneven white thread. She held it out. "I kept it." He took it slowly and tied it around her wrist. His hands shook. She looked up at him then, bold now, with the innocence only children still possess. "Can I come home now?" Liu knelt before her. "Not yet, but soon. I have to find a way to take you where no one can follow, a place where there are no lists." She nodded. "Like a story." He smiled. "Like a story." She leaned into him then, resting her head against his chest, and for a moment the world ceased its turning. There was no temple, no empire, no loss, only the warmth of a father's arms and the steady beat of a heart that had waited too long to love again. Footsteps in the distance startled them both. Liu rose quickly. "Go," he whispered. "But I'll find you again, in 2 nights, same place. Bring nothing, just come." She nodded, eyes wide. Then she was gone, swallowed by the corridor between the laundry and the shrine, her small feet barely making a sound. Liu stood still long after she left. When he finally turned to go, he tucked the sash into his robe and walked into the night. He had no plan yet, only the promise of a meeting, and the memory of her voice calling him Baba in a whisper that had carried more strength than any army. He would not fail her again. Not now. The wind shifted on the 14th day, carrying with it the faint scent of pine resin and river silt. It was a quiet change, one that would have gone unnoticed by many. But to Liu Cheng, who had grown attuned to every shadow and whisper in the temple, it felt like a warning. The scent meant traders had passed through the outer gates, men from the southern road who brought scrolls, dyes, oil, and news. And news meant questions. He kept his head low that day, returning to the incense storehouse under the pretense of repairing a broken door latch. From behind the warped wooden frame, he watched as 2 strangers entered the temple court with the afternoon sun behind them. Both wore travelling cloaks, dust still clinging to their boots. They bowed before the abbot, presented scrolls, then spoke quietly. Too far for Liu to hear. But he saw the abbot's face. It did not change. His face never did. But one of the monks behind him stiffened. They had come for inventory. That meant names. Liu turned and walked back toward the garden shed with measured pace, but inside his heart raced. His promise to Linhua, 2 nights, suddenly felt fragile. The world was shifting again, as it always did, just when something good had dared to bloom. That night, he did not sleep. He waited for the moon to climb high, then moved silently through the side path, avoiding the lantern-lit courtyards, stepping only where his feet would leave no trace. He reached the old courtyard wall, the one behind the storage yard where clay pots were kept. At its base, half covered by fallen leaves, lay the place he'd chosen days ago, in secret, a gap in the stone where erosion had eaten through the base, just wide enough for a child to crawl through. He had cleared the other side already, dug beneath the brush, pressed aside the thorn vines. Beyond the gap lay the start of the river path. It led nowhere on maps, but Liu had walked it once at dusk. It twisted through wild plum trees and ended near the disused ferry post where salt fishermen once tied their skiffs. The ferry was gone, but the land was empty, silent, waiting. He marked the wall again, 3 scratches near the base, a signal for Linhua. He would bring her here in 2 nights. If the traders moved on quickly, if the monks didn't check names too closely, they could vanish by first light. The next day, he worked as usual, but the temple had changed. The traders stayed longer. They ate in the side hall. They questioned the novices, asked about temple records. They walked the grounds, slow and inquisitive. Their presence was a blade wrapped in silk, polite but sharp. Liu avoided them as best he could, but one caught sight of him near the orchard. "You," the man called. Liu turned slowly. "Yes? You're the groundsman?" "I sweep and mend, yes." "What's your name?" "Qing," he lied. "From the hills. I came here after the floods." The man nodded. Many do. He walked on, and Liu exhaled through his teeth. That night he returned to the gap in the wall again, this time burying a cloth pouch beneath the stones, dried yam, a half-gourd of water, and the red sash. He laid them gently as if placing offerings in a tomb. Then he covered it with earth and marked the spot with a flat stone. On the 15th day he saw Linhua again. She passed him in the corridor between the laundry house and the shrine, her basket balanced on her hip. She did not pause. She only brushed one hand against the wall, fingers trailing along the bricks in a line that stopped at the edge of the incense shadows. He followed that night, as arranged. She came, just after moonrise, her steps quiet, her eyes wide. She wore a brown shift too large for her frame and carried no bundle. Her doll, Yuer, hung from a thread around her neck. They met behind the storehouse, where the old stones glowed faintly in the moonlight. Liu crouched before her. "Are you ready?" She nodded. "I didn't tell anyone, not even May. Good girl." She looked at him. "Are we going home?" "Not yet, but away from here. We'll find somewhere new." She held out her hand. "I'm not scared." He took it. "You're brave, like your mother." Her lips trembled slightly, but she held firm. "Will she be there?" He looked toward the trees, then back. "We'll find her too, I promise." They moved quickly then, Liu lifting her easily in his arms, her head against his shoulder. She was lighter than he remembered, too light, but she smelled the same, of rice husk and old clay and something soft that had never left his memory. They reached the wall. He set her down and uncovered the pouch, tied it to his belt, then lifted the stone. The hole yawned like a secret passage. She crawled first, slipping through with barely a sound. He followed, twisting his body through the narrow space, his back scraping the stone, hands pulling at roots. Then they were out. On the other side, the trees stood tall and dark, and the river path gleamed like a thread of silver beneath the stars. Liu took her hand and they ran. Not fast, not foolish, but swift and low, with purpose. Behind them, the temple bell rang once for midnight. Another hour, and the patrols would change. They did not look back. The world before them was wide and dark, but it was theirs now, and it held her name. The river path curved like a ribbon unravelling in the dark, lined on both sides by tall reeds that hissed softly in the wind. The moonlight guided them, silvering the earth and dancing on the water's edge. Liu Cheng walked ahead now, his hand around Linhua's, never too tight, always ready to pull her forward or push her down if danger emerged. Behind them the temple bell had rung again, once, maybe twice, but not in alarm. Not yet. Linhua said nothing, though her small hand clutched his with a steadiness far beyond her years. Her doll, Yuer, dangled against her chest, bumping softly with each step. From time to time she would glance up at her father, her mouth parted as if to speak, then close it again. Liu sensed her questions, her fear. But there was no space for answers here, not until they reached the grove. The grove lay 2 hills beyond the temple walls, nestled beside a bend in the river, where the stones were smooth and flat, and the old fishermen used to dry their nets. Liu had passed it once on his way to the ferry post, a place forgotten, even by birds. It had no shrine, no lanterns, only silence. They reached it just before the 3rd bell. The moon had dipped low now, casting long shadows that crawled along the grass. Liu let Linhua rest beneath a tree with wide roots. He knelt beside the water, refilled their gourd, then returned and passed it to her. She drank carefully, then looked up at him. "You were really there," she whispered, "in the temple." He nodded. "I saw you once before, but I thought you were a ghost." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes I did too." She reached into the pouch he had packed and pulled out the red sash. "Did Mama give you this again?" He shook his head. "No, it was waiting for me." They sat in silence a while, the wind combing through the grass. The scent of river silt and wet bark clung to the air. Finally, Linhua whispered, "Where do we go now?" Liu stared into the dark beyond the grove. "South, maybe. The traders don't go that way often. There are valleys where the state forgets to look and people who remember other names. She leaned against him. Will we find Mama? Yes, he said softly. We'll find her. He didn't know if it was true. He didn't know if Maylin still lived, or if the levy had taken her too. But in Linhua's voice he heard the same quiet yearning that had haunted his own dreams, and he would not let it go unanswered. He let her sleep then, curled beside the tree, her head on his lap, his cloak wrapped around her shoulders. She did not cry. She did not speak again. She simply closed her eyes and slipped into slumber like a candle burning low. Liu remained awake. He watched the moon retreat behind the hills and listened for footsteps, dogs, soldiers, but none came. Only the sound of the river, steady and slow. At dawn, they moved again. The forest thickened. The path narrowed. Liu carried Linhua when her legs tired, whispering to her of old stories, tales of the carp that leapt the waterfall and became dragons, of the girl who planted a single plum stone and grew a tree taller than any emperor's hall. These stories were not for entertainment. They were spells, words to keep fear at bay, to hold her spirit steady. By the second day, their food had dwindled to a few dried yams. They passed no farms, no huts, only stones etched with moss and the ruins of an abandoned torii gate split in two. Once they heard hoofbeats far off and ducked into a thicket until the sound passed. On the third evening, just as dusk slipped over the hills like a silk scarf, they found the river crossing. It was not a bridge, only a series of flat stones that jutted from the shallows, worn smooth by time. Liu stepped across first, testing each one. Then he lifted Linhua in his arms and carried her carefully, her arms around his neck, her breath warm against his cheek. Halfway across, he paused, looked upstream. A deer stood there, drinking from the river's bend. Its ears twitched, then it turned and vanished into the reeds. He watched it go. On the other side, they camped beneath a rock ledge. Liu lit a small fire using dried bark and the last of the oil from the gourd. Linhua warmed her fingers beside the flame. Her eyes gleamed with tired wonder. "Is this freedom?" she asked. Liu turned the stick he used to stoke the fire. "It's not what the songs say. But yes, it starts here." She nodded and leaned against him again. When she fell asleep, he took the sash and tied it once more around her wrist, not as a reminder now, but as a charm. For the road ahead. He looked into the flames, listening to the night sounds, the low croak of frogs, the hush of wind through dry leaves, the gentle crack of burning bark. And for the first time since she had been taken, since he had buried her name beneath bamboo rafters and carved it into reed walls, Liu Cheng allowed himself a single breath of relief. It was not over. They would walk still, hide still, fear still. But tonight his daughter slept beside him, and no bell would take her away again. The morning of the fourth day dawned pale and damp, the sky the colour of smoke, hanging low and close to the hills. Liu Cheng woke before Linhua, his back stiff from the cold earth and his shoulders sore from carrying her the day before. But he did not complain. Pain, to him, had become familiar, no different than breath or heartbeat. He crouched beside the small fire, coaxing the last embers to life with a breath and a few dry leaves. The flame returned reluctantly, flickering low and orange. He boiled a handful of soaked millet in a cracked gourd shell and stirred it until it thickened into something edible. It was enough to quiet Linhua's hunger for the morning. She stirred as the scent of warm grain touched the air. "Baba," she mumbled. "I'm here." She sat up slowly, rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand, and blinked at the soft grey light filtering through the trees. The dampness had curled her braid overnight, and the red sash at her wrist was smudged with ash. Still, she smiled faintly when she saw him. "Did we sleep long?" "Long enough," Liu replied, handing her the food. "We'll need to move again soon. The river turns east here toward lower valleys." She nodded, eating slowly without speaking. But Liu saw the tiredness behind her eyes, the kind that had nothing to do with sleep. She had carried too much for too long, and the road ahead would not get easier. By midday, they had reached the valley's rim. From there they could see fields below, green and golden patches of farmland stretching toward the horizon, broken only by a few trees and distant rooftops. The sight made Liu hesitate. Civilization meant food, warmth, the possibility of safety. But it also meant watchmen, registries, questions. Still, they could not hide in the woods forever. They skirted the edges of the fields as best they could, moving behind hedgerows and fallen stone walls, keeping low whenever they heard voices. Once, as they passed near a barn, a rooster called out sharply and startled Linhua into stillness. Liu pulled her close, whispered a calming word, then waited until the silence returned before pressing on. They reached the outskirts of a village by dusk. It was small, perhaps 10 homes clustered around a shared well, with narrow footpaths and a single rice mill standing crooked at the edge. No soldiers, no banners, only a few old men playing stones and cups in the fading light, and women washing clothes on flat stones by the creek. Liu approached slowly, Linhua close behind. The first to see them was a woman with a wide-brimmed straw hat and hands darkened by years of dye and soap. She looked at Liu, then at the child beside him, and said nothing. "We've come from the north," Liu said quietly. "We're not staying. Just need a meal and a place to sit." The woman studied him. "The north's been cruel." He nodded. "It has." She gestured toward a covered porch nearby. "Sit there. My daughter will bring broth." Liu bowed deeply. "Thank you." They sat in silence, Linhua resting her head against her father's arm, legs swinging gently above the ground. The warmth of the porch wood seeped into their bodies, and for the first time in days, the tension in Liu's shoulders eased just slightly. The daughter came soon after, a teenage girl with sharp eyes and a gentle step. She offered a bowl of hot broth and a heel of bread without speaking. Liu thanked her with a nod. They ate slowly. As night fell, a lantern was lit beside the porch, casting golden shadows across the beams. The woman returned and stood beside the doorway. "We've seen others like you," she said softly. "From the camps, from the roads." Liu looked up. "You don't ask for charity," she continued, "but you carry sorrow like a wound." He lowered his eyes. She sat beside him then. "We have a healer in this village. Not a real doctor, but he's tended to the broken before. Your daughter walks like her feet are blistered." "They are. She should rest." "I can't risk staying long." The woman nodded slowly. "Then at least let her sleep indoors tonight. The shed is empty, dry. We won't ask questions." Liu hesitated. Linhua looked at him. He finally nodded. That night they lay together beneath a rough wool blanket, the stars hidden by thatch and smoke. The shed smelled of straw and old clay, but it was dry and the air was still. Linhua's breathing slowed beside him. Her hand found his under the blanket. "Do you think Mama ever saw stars like these?" she whispered. "I think she did. Did you ever show her this red sash? I wore it on my chest until I found you." She smiled faintly, her eyes fluttering shut. He watched her for a long time. In the darkness, with the crickets chirping and the wind whispering against the eaves, Liu dared to imagine a world beyond the chase. A place where Linhua could run barefoot through grass without glancing over her shoulder. A place with laughter, with food grown by their own hands, with a name that wasn't listed on any register. He didn't know if they'd ever reach such a place. But as he lay beside her, with her hand in his, Liu knew one thing as surely as he knew his own heartbeat. He would never stop walking until they did. The morning in the village of low roofs and quiet water came with the smell of damp earth and boiled rice. Liu Cheng rose slowly from the straw mat, careful not to wake Linhua. She still slept deeply, her limbs splayed across the blanket in the careless sprawl of a child who, for the first time in many moons, had no reason to fear the dawn. The sun was barely more than a pale promise behind the mist, yet the village had already begun to stir. Chickens clucked from behind fences made of tied reeds. Somewhere near the well, a ladle clanged softly against a bucket. A dog barked once, then fell silent again. The world outside the capital, outside the sound of soldiers' boots and the scent of registry ink, moved slowly here, like breath. Liu slipped out of the shed and stretched his arms against the chill. His tunic still bore the marks of old soot and dye. His sandals had nearly come apart at the seams. But his body, thin and scarred, was stronger than it had been weeks ago. Survival had carved him into something else, not invincible, but harder to break. He found the woman from the day before boiling water over a clay stove, her daughter rinsing beans nearby. "I can help," Liu offered. The woman waved him toward a log. "You've helped enough by coming quietly. Most pass through like fire, fast and consuming." "I was fire once," Liu said. The woman glanced at him. "Now you're smoke." They shared a quiet smile. He stayed with them until the rice was done. helping sort herbs and cutting roots with a small stone blade. When Linhua woke, she wandered out barefoot, rubbing her eyes and yawning. The girl from the night before handed her a sweet bean cake without a word. Linhua sat at Liu's feet to eat it, legs tucked beneath her, the red sash still tied firm around her wrist. Later that day, Liu asked the woman where the healer lived. She pointed toward a hut near the forest's edge, its roof patched with bark and moss. "He doesn't talk much," she said, "but he listens." Liu carried Linhua there, though she insisted she could walk. Her blisters had cracked during the run through the river paths, and now her feet were swollen, each step a struggle she tried to hide behind clenched teeth. But when he lifted her, she didn't resist. She only rested her head on his shoulder and stared quietly at the sky. The healer was a man of few words, his face half hidden behind a greying beard, his hands rough and covered with tiny cuts. He took one look at Linhua's feet and nodded. "She needs 2 days," he said. "Maybe 3. "We don't have 3, Liu replied. The healer didn't answer. He soaked Linhua's feet in a bowl of warm herbs, then applied a poultice that smelled of mint and pine sap. Linhua flinched once, but bore it bravely. "Let her stay," the healer said, not as a request, but as a command. "You can sleep by the door." Liu bowed. That evening, they sat on the wooden platform outside the hut, watching the sky darken behind the hills. Linhua leaned against him once more, her bandaged feet tucked beneath a borrowed blanket. "Baba," she said suddenly, "do you remember the old bridge?" Liu blinked. "Which one?" "The one near the shrine with the red roof. We used to drop sticks in the water and race them." He smiled faintly. "You always won." "I cheated." "I know." They both laughed, soft and private. The sound startled a bird in the tree above, which flew off in a burst of feathers. Linhua followed it with her eyes until it disappeared into the dusk. "Do you think," she whispered, "that Mama might still be near there?" "The old shrine?" Liu hesitated. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I believe she's alive." Linhua didn't speak again, but her head rested more heavily on his shoulder after that. When her breathing slowed and deepened, he lifted her gently and carried her inside the healer's hut, laying her on the woven mat and tucking the blanket over her small frame. He stepped outside once more, standing beneath the stars. For the first time in days, the road behind them did not press on his heels. There were no drums, no bells, no hoofbeats on distant stone. The earth was soft beneath his feet. The air was thick with wood smoke and the scent of late plum blossoms. Yet still, his mind turned. They could not stay. Word would spread of a man with a wounded child, passing quietly, asking no questions. All it took was one loyal merchant, one hungry scribe, one man eager to impress the empire. The girl's name was still in the registry. Her absence was still a red mark somewhere. He looked toward the south. Beyond the next set of hills lay another province, one known for its wetlands, its salt harvesters, its reed weavers. Fewer soldiers patrolled there. The empire was distant, its grip loosened by the geography. They would go there next. He returned to the hut and sat beside Linhua, listening to her breathe. Her doll, Yue, lay beside her hand, its threadbare body twisted slightly. Liu gently placed it upright again. Then he closed his eyes and let the quiet take him, if only for the night. Tomorrow they would walk again. But tonight they were not running. The rain returned on the 5th day. It came softly at first, a delicate pattering on the healer's thatched roof, barely more than a whisper. But by midday it had deepened into a steady downpour, drumming on the eaves, soaking the village paths, turning the dust into thick rust-coloured mud that clung to sandals and soaked into hems. The world became hushed beneath it, voices lowered, tools abandoned, doors drawn tight. Liu Cheng sat beneath the narrow awning outside the healer's hut, watching the rain thread down from the sky in long silver strands. Beside him, Linhua leaned her head against his side, her feet wrapped in clean cloth, dry and slightly pink where the medicine had drawn out the swelling. She was warmer now, stronger. The shadows beneath her eyes had lightened. She still wore the red sash tied in a careful knot around her wrist. She never asked to take it off. The healer moved inside like a wraith, quiet, methodical, respectful of their silence. He spoke only when needed and never lingered. A bowl of warm broth arrived at midday. A scrap of clean linen was laid out beside the hearth without comment. "I don't think he sleeps," Linhua whispered. Liu chuckled softly. He's been caring for ghosts longer than people, maybe. Outside, the world blurred with mist and water. The village had disappeared behind a curtain of rain. The few homes they could see flickered with candlelight, shapes moving behind lattice windows. "Will we leave tomorrow?" Linhua asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "If the rain breaks, where will we go? South. Will there be trees? More than you've ever seen." She tilted her head. "Will I go to school? Maybe. Will I learn to write my name?" Liu looked down at her. "Do you remember how?" She closed her eyes. "Mama used to show me with her finger in the rice dust." He nodded. "You'll learn again, this time with ink. And will I get to choose my own name one day?" He thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, when you're ready." Linhua smiled and the silence returned between them. But it was no longer a silence of fear or hiding. It was the silence of shelter, of belonging. That night the rain did not let up. The village gathered in the shared hall, 15 people at most, old and young, huddled around a central fire. Liu was invited without formality. Linhua wrapped in his cloak as they stepped through the slanting sheets of water into the low room lit by embers and stories. An elder with a voice like dry reeds began to tell tales. Not of emperors or dragons, but of winds that knew the names of the dead, of lanterns that guided souls through fog, of children born under eclipse who carried fire in their veins. Linhua sat still, eyes wide, her hands tucked into her sleeves. At one point, a woman passed a small cup to Liu, rice wine, warmed and smoky. He drank it slowly, letting it ease into his bones. He hadn't tasted anything like it since the year Linhua was born. Across the circle, the healer gave a nod. It meant, she's ready. Later, when they returned to the hut and Linhua had drifted into sleep once more, Liu sat beside her and packed what little they had: dried yam, the last of the gourd water, fresh cloth for her feet, and the red sash folded tightly. The doll Yue, he let her keep in her hand. He stepped out into the night again. The rain had slowed now, falling in long, heavy drops that splashed into puddles and shimmered in the light of the moon breaking through clouds. He walked to the edge of the village where the rice fields sloped downward toward the forest. There he stood, looking south. He could see nothing. But he imagined the road, imagined them walking it. No longer fugitives, but wanderers. A father and a daughter, bound not by fear, but by a story too long to be forgotten. He remembered every step of the path that had brought them here, every night alone, every whispered name, every moment he had fought not to fall to the ground and stay there forever. And now she was with him again. He turned back toward the hut and saw a light in the window. Linhua had woken. She was waiting. He would rest for one more night. And in the morning, when the clouds broke and the wind turned clean again, they would walk, no longer escaping, but searching. The rain broke just after dawn. It left the world rinsed and glistening. Leaves glittered like glass in the morning sun. The clay paths shone red and wet, and a gentle fog clung to the ground, slowly lifting in ribbons as the day warmed. Birds returned cautiously to the trees, their songs tentative but growing with each passing hour. The village stirred like a waking child, slow and quiet, as though reluctant to break the peace the storm had left behind. Liu Cheng rose early. He folded the blanket, packed the last of their food, tied Linghua's reed doll carefully into a loop of cloth, and made sure the red sash was secured once more to her wrist. It had faded, but its threads held. So did his resolve. The healer met them at the edge of the village. He offered no blessing, no farewell speech, only a pouch of salve for Linhua's healing feet, and a nod that held the weight of everything unsaid. "Be slow in the mornings," he murmured. "Children tire faster when the dew is thick." Liu bowed low. "You've given us more than rest." The healer shrugged. "You remembered to be a father. That was yours to reclaim." They left just after the sun climbed above the tallest roof. A few villagers watched from doorways, some with mild curiosity, others with quiet respect. No one called after them. No one asked questions. Linhua looked back once, her eyes catching on the little garden behind the healer's hut, where the mint grew wild. Then she turned forward, taking Liu's hand in hers. The path south was narrow, but worn. Farmers had used it for generations to reach the salt marshes and reed flats, though few passed this way since the last war had burned the ferry town. The road curved gently through the hills, rising and falling with the land's natural rhythm. To Liu, it felt like walking through the ribs of an ancient sleeping creature, alive but long still. They spoke little. Linhua walked steadily beside him, stopping now and then to rest against a stone or squat to poke at a worm wriggling from the damp soil. Her steps were uneven at times, but she never complained. And when the pain did return, she only tightened her grip on his hand and kept going. By midday, they reached a wide slope that opened into a low valley, and beyond it, the shimmer of water, the salt plains. The landscape changed there. The trees thinned, giving way to clusters of pale reeds that bent in the breeze, their tops rustling like whispers. The soil grew white in patches where salt crusted the edges of drying pools. A strange silence hung over the place, not ominous, but sacred, as though the land itself remembered something ancient and refused to speak of it. Liu led her along the edge, avoiding the worst of the bogs. They moved slowly, stepping carefully between the higher ridges where the ground held firm. Birds skimmed the surface of still waters. Insects danced in columns above the marsh grass. It was near one of these reed thickets that they found the old shrine. It stood no taller than a man, its roof slanted and moss-covered, the offering bowl empty and cracked. A single paper talisman fluttered on the doorframe, faded by sun and wind. Liu paused before it. "Shall we rest?" he asked. Linhua nodded and sat on the dry stone beside the shrine. Liu pulled out their gourd and passed it to her. She drank, then wiped her mouth on her sleeve, eyes half-lidded with fatigue. "We can stay here for the night," he said. "I'll build a small shelter. There's dry wood. Is this place safe?" He glanced around. The shrine was far from the roads. The salt marsh stretched wide in all directions. The reeds would hide them from view. The water, though brackish, was not poisoned. "As safe as we can find," he answered. That afternoon, Liu gathered fallen branches and made a lean-to between two rocks. He covered it with layers of reeds, tying them with strips of flax pulled from an old bundle. Linhua helped, fetching dry kindling, arranging stones for a hearth. She moved slowly but with purpose, her shoulders squared like Malin's once had been when she mended clothes under the dying light of day. They ate the last of the yams. Liu soaked rice in warm water, letting it soften in the clay pot borrowed from the healer. It was bland but filling. Linhua fell asleep not long after, her body curled beside the shrine, Yue held tight against her chest. Liu stayed awake. He watched the moon rise over the salt flats, full and golden, casting a glow that made the marsh shimmer as if the land itself breathed. He thought of all they had escaped. The camp, the temple, the lists. The silence of the village where names were taken and never spoken again. And he thought of what lay ahead. Tomorrow they would find the road to the reed villages. He had heard stories of people who lived among the marshes, weaving mats and baskets, trading salt and water lilies. Some claimed they were exiles. Others said they were protectors of the forgotten. Perhaps that was what he had become too, a protector of a single name. He looked back at Linhua, her small chest rising and falling in the hush of sleep. Her face, even in rest, bore the trace of watchfulness, as though part of her still listened for footsteps or bells, but she was safe, for now. Liu lay beside her and closed his eyes. No dreams came, only the soft whisper of reeds and the memory of her voice, once lost, now his to carry.